I'm Tiziana Ulian, and I'm a scientist, and I work at the Royal Botanic Garden Kew. And I'm based at the Millennium Seed Bank at Wakehurst, which is located in Sussex. There are many species of beans. Probably what we call beans, and is more familiar to most of us, is Phaseolus vulgaris, which is the most common bean that we all know and we eat. But actually out there are many more beans, and a lot of these beans are wild species. So in the Millennium Seed Bank, where I work, we actually conserve beans from different species. In total, we conserve over 40,000 species from all the plant families. Within this collection, there is a high percentage of species that belong to the Fabaceae family. As part of my work, is actually very important that we combine conservation and sustainable use, which means that all our conservation activities involve local communities. My first project really that involved local community was called the Useful Plant Project that I led for almost 10 years. And this was a project in Mexico, in Latin America, and in Africa we were working in Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, and Mali. And this is really the first project where the involvement of the community was very high. So we started from our sort of checklist of species that we wanted to conserve, but then we really went and talked to the local communities to understand which species they wanted to conserve and therefore which seeds they wanted to conserve. So for example, some of these species or seeds were from food plants, some other that were from medicinal plants or for even material to use as a part of the building of the houses, of the infrastructure around them. It's very important to involve local communities from the beginning of a project, and it's important to assess the needs of the local communities. So by involving them from the beginning, you are setting up a project, you are implementing a project where you are responding to a need, a local need, and then you have to involve the local community throughout all the process. And for example, training is also a very important step in the development of a project that works together with local communities. Indigenous people and local communities in general, they have a knowledge of seeds and also local plants. So it's very important when you implement a conservation project to take into account the local knowledge or the indigenous knowledge of the people. This is because local people, they associate or they have a long-term knowledge of, for example, of a species, how a species is used, but also they have knowledge of the practice, for example, in agriculture. And this knowledge about agriculture, for example, is linked to the environmental condition where they live. So somehow it's important really to work with them as well and understand also their practices, because in this way you're also to incorporate this knowledge into your project. So you basically put together what is innovation that can come from science with traditional knowledge, and that's really a winning match for projects like this kind. We only use a small proportion of all the species that are available for us out there for food. So for example, it's mainly 3 species, which are wheat, corn, and rice, that they're used for most of our plant-based nutrition. In reality, there are many more species out there, probably more than 30,000 species. So it's very important to bring this diversity of species into our plates. And also it's important not only for our diet, but it's also important for the environment, because by bringing and using this diversity of species of food plants out there, we can at the same time conserve biodiversity. It's also important for the environment because by diversifying our diet, at the same time we are using more diversity for our diets. And in this way, indirectly, we are conserving more biodiversity out there. It takes time to build trust with communities, so it's very important also somehow to start working in a community through local contacts. So it's important not just to go there straight away and ask to work with them. And you need to explain very well what you want to do and what you want to achieve with your project. In this way, I think if you build trust and you explain very well and very clearly what you want to achieve, I think it really helps building this relationship with the community. At the end, it becomes a very important collaboration. If you only work with local community, of course, you achieve impact on the local level. But it's very important to bring with you in your journey, your project, also, for example, governmental organization, non-governmental organization, to build sustainability. Often, non-governmental organizations are the organizations that work with local community. So this really helps when you have a project to build sustainability in the long term, because your project will have finished, but the NGO, the non-governmental organization, will continue there. So in this way, by working with them, you really build sustainability in your work. On the other hand, it's very important to explain to officials from the government what you are doing, not only because they need to be aware about what you are doing, but potentially they can support your work as well. It's very important that you build a collaboration. Governments, at the end of the day, they're really also trying to help people at the local level. So you have to show how your work can help them as well, so they can help you. So it's very important to establish this collaboration. From a funding point of view as well, they can be aware, or they can have access to funds that can really catalyze your work, or they can support your work. For example, in the past, there have been some subsidies that they've used just for a few species, but we need to convince also the governments that it's important to use a wider diversity of plants, for example, in order to have an impact on the ground. In our work, we collect seeds, and we collect also the knowledge around seeds in order to have an impact on the ground. However, some species, they can, for example, germinate or be regenerated very easily. But some other is not so straightforward. It's more research that enable the germination of species that otherwise they wouldn't germinate. It's an important achievement because you allow the use of a particular species through the research that involve the seed biology or the seed ecology of the species. Seed research is very important in general because it allows to regenerate species. So after you collect the seeds, you conserve the seeds, it's very important to understand which temperature, for example, you want to apply, or which mechanism you want to apply for a species to germinate. In this way, when I say to germinate a species, really at the end is to regenerate a plant, in this case, and at the same time to use these plants in the future. For example, when you carry out germination experiments, it's very important to understand the range of temperature at which a species can germinate. Normally, there is like a minimum temperature at which a seed can start germinating, and there is a maximum temperature. But there is also an optimal temperature. So if you apply, for example, that optimal temperature, you can ensure that most of the seeds can germinate at the higher percentage. And this is also important in the light of climate change. By understanding the temperature at which a species can germinate, you also can predict in the future which species can germinate better under future climatic changes. I think since I was little, I was very much keen and really I was trying to conserve plants or animals. And when I started working at the Millennium Seed Bank, I found the seed banking a method to conserve plants. But on the other hand, as I started working in developing countries, for example, in Africa, Latin America, I discovered that more and more that, okay, conservation is important, but you need to keep supporting also the livelihood of local people. So it's important to combine conservation and use of the seeds. One example would be my last project in Mexico. We are working with coffee producers and we are working in shade-grown coffee plantations. It's important to select the right species for the production of coffee, but also it's important to select the species, the trees that are native, so they are more likely to withstand future climatic changes. And also we are looking at which trees, for example, they have a higher capacity to capture carbon to mitigate climate change. Finally, also we are looking at species that they have other uses. So, for example, fruit trees that they can be used, for example, not only for the local food security, but even to improve the income of the coffee producers. It's very important to work with the coffee producers at the end. We select the species that we think they are more likely to be useful in the shade coffee plantations. It's also important to discuss with them other characteristics that might be needed for growing coffee. For example, they know which species that they would do better in the coffee plantation. So again, you combine your scientific knowledge with the traditional knowledge of the coffee producers. It's important not only to involve local people in projects, but also to keep working with them. And also the output, for example, the result of a project need to be shared more widely. The information should reach people at the local level, but also should reach policy makers. For this reason, you have to use different language as well. So for practitioners, they need technical information, but for policymakers, of course, you need to produce an information that can help them to make informed decisions. I think it's very important to mention the Nagoya Protocol that it derived from the Convention on Biological Diversity. The Nagoya Protocol was developed in 2010, and it's very important because it really set up the terms in terms of accessing and sharing also traditional knowledge, genetic resources more in general. So, for example, the Millennium Seed Bank, we have agreements that are called access and benefit sharing agreements. And not only in these agreements, we tell what we do with the genetic resources, the seeds in this sense, but also with the knowledge that is associated to these resources. It's very important that the results of the project they go back to the local communities. So again, in this exchange of the information, traditional knowledge with the scientific knowledge, all the results they need to go back to the community in order to support and to have an impact on the ground. We have a high diversity of plant species in the world. We should conserve it, but the best way also to conserve this high diversity is through use. So this is what is called conservation by use. And also it's important to understand and to carry out research that allows us to understand which species are more likely to withstand future climatic changes. For example, by carrying out seed germination studies and looking at the temperature and the variability in terms of temperature and germination. But on the other hand, also it's important to identify at the genetic level with genes that are within species that can be useful to withstand future climatic changes.